Hey, everybody. Welcome to Dynasty Junkies, episode 181, a proud member of the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network, or the DAP Network, if you will. We certainly will. All three of us. Great. I am joined by my co-host, Andrew Hall at Andrew Hall FF. How you doing today, buddy?
Doing great, Tommy. Glad to be here. Anytime we get to talk Dynasty together, I feel like I learned something. So it's a good day. Any day we're talking fantasy football in general, it's a good day.
Yeah, I hear you've been all over the podcast streets lately. This is your
Yes.
third episode of the day, right?
Yes. I was on the Spaces earlier with the Patrick Pucci show with Jay Sieg and other people. That was a lot of fun doing like a quick run around. And then I just did before this, I recorded the worst interview show with Jack Lucenay. So that was entertaining. So yeah, just, kind of booking things in a little bit of a lining them up too much in a row for me. But hey, you got to go when you got to go. Scott Fishbowl is just bringing everybody out. I love it.
Man, I do too. It does feel like there's a little bit of extra energy in the air with Scott Fishbowl drafts going on. And just, I mean, it's a quiet time of the calendar, but that always sparks, I don't know, new conversations, new interactions, new folks on the air. And that's exactly what we're doing today, Andrew. We're bringing on somebody who maybe the listeners haven't heard before. I'm going to introduce him just as Billy. I want you to go ahead and just talk a little bit about yourself, your background playing Dynasty, because I've learned a ton from you, man. You and I DM back and forth, and you're a great strategist. And I think the Junkies listeners need to hear what you have to say.
Oh, thanks, Tommy. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm Billy. I've been playing Dynasty about 8 years now. I remember the first time a friend asked me, he's like, "Hey, we're gonna do a league and we don't cut our players." And I was like, "Okay, I'm in. Like, I'm all in." Like,
Yes.
and it's been kind of an addiction, if you will, ever since. So I play Dynasty a bit differently. I'm an old video gamer, like playing since I was like, I don't know, 10 years old. And I was always the kid who picked the weird classes, like, class A, B, and C are really good to beat the game. And then there's these other ones that no one picks. I'm like, great, I'll pick E. Everyone's like, no, that's actually terrible. I'm like, I want to see if I can beat it with E. And that's kind of how I play Dynasty football, which is kind of how we connected. You threw out some weird strategies. I'm like, great. Like, this is now, I'm all in. Like, I want to see if I can win this way. So that's how I play Dynasty.
Yeah, man, I love it. And you come up with your own weird stuff that makes me a better Dynasty player, better fantasy player. And I think more when I interact with the listeners. And it feels like, July is the perfect time of year for you, Billy, to represent the thoughtful listener. That's what we're going to attempt to do today.
Sounds great.
Cool, man. So let's get into it a little bit. Scott Fishbowl 14 has kicked off. Billy, are you in Scott Fishbowl this year?
I'm not.
Next year, man. Next year, we're going to get you in because it's so much fun.
Yeah.
Andrew, why don't you just give me a little rundown? How's your Scott Fishbowl draft?
Honestly, we're just now creeping into the final round. I was in the Cincinnati live draft that started on Saturday, so we're, I guess, in day 6 at this point. I had the 111 in the Dr. Emmett Brown division, or as I started calling it, the 1.181 gigawatts. You know what I mean? Like just the 111. I'm very excited to be in that. Back to the Future is one of my all-time favorite movies, so felt like meant to be there. But I'm drafting with some terrific guys. We all, everybody was there for the draft, and we had 6 drafts going on Saturday at Voodoo Brewing here in Cincinnati. It was just such a fun time. So, I'm very excited. My team started out pretty stellar. I got to be honest. I didn't know what to expect. The 111 chat was kind of going nuts with like, what are we going to do? And everybody was pretty much saying, I don't know. It depends. Because, you don't really want to plan too far ahead. And I think 11, the whole point is I don't want to plan. I just want to see how the draft goes and take it from there. And then, of course, that third round reversal, that always helps for those later picks, too. So I feel like I was blessed, in my opinion anyway, to get Bijan to fall to me at 111. I was astounded is the word that comes to mind. I didn't think that was going to happen, but I am very happy for it. And then I got Tyreek Hill in the second. So, again, 2 guys that I think are both top 10 players in redraft, and I got them both at, the 11th slot. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. How about you, though, Tommy? I know yours has started, at least. I don't think you finished, but you're going, right?
Yeah, so I just want to comment real quickly. I love
sure.
the Tyreek Hill pick because if he is returning kicks, he probably should have been drafted 101. The kick return bonus is just
see.
absurd. And if you're going to add 70 points, 80 points, 100 points to Tyreek Hill's scoring seasonally, like you might have just shot the moon there.
Exactly. I was surprised he was there. I was debating him or Bijan at 111.
Yeah.
And the guy at 12 who was on the turn, Matt Lepensee, I think I'm saying that right. He ended up going with the Detroit stack. He took Gibbs and Laporta at 12 and 2-1. I don't mind that, but it meant that Hill was left for me, and I very much enjoyed that. So yeah, I am with you. I think we've talked about this in all sorts of places, I feel like now, but that kick return bonus in Scott Fishbowl, we don't really know what we don't know. And I think there's a lot of people trying to predict what that's going to be. And I'm sure, Billy, even if you're not in the league, I'm sure you've seen it on Twitter all over the place, right? So it's like Rashid Shaheed 101. Like, I don't know about that. Like, we aren't sure who's going to be returning kicks. If you're good enough at returning kicks, you might just be a receiver because they just don't want to hurt you. I mean, you have to be just bad enough and just good enough. That's hard to find.
Yep, totally. I haven't really experienced the full force of Scott Fishbowl, if I'm being totally honest. Our draft is going very slowly.
Yeah.
I think the second slowest in the Lando Calrissian division. Doesn't mean it's not fun. I mean, the chat's still popping. A lot of really great people, analysts, and listeners as well. I was 101, got Josh Allen, followed it up with Mark Andrews, Jaden Daniels, and Kyle Pitts. So, like, pretty solid foundation. I feel good about that, especially with the tight end premium. I was not planning on getting that second quarterback, especially so early. But I thought Jaden Daniels in the third, where passing scoring is nuked so much, I could have another top 5, top 6 quarterback on my hands. And if I can stack 2 top 6 quarterbacks in a 4,000 person tournament, why the heck not? I mean, I'm terrible at Scott Fishbowl, so I don't even plan on making the playoffs, if I'm being honest.
There's Ryan in the chat. Ryan McDowell was at the Cincy Live Draft. Hi, Ryan. How's it going? Thanks for stopping by. Much love to you, sir.
What's up, man?
Always working on them spreadsheets. But yeah, so real quick too, I want to back up on this. So Mark Andrews, you took at the end of the second, then right at the 101, right before the third round reversal. I got Mark Andrews in the third round, a couple of picks after that with the reversal. So I'm with you. I love Mark Andrews this year, but tight end 3, it definitely feels right. I mean, you didn't feel like it was a reach, I'm assuming, right?
I mean, it felt like a bit of a reach, but the fact that we can't trade, we can't move around in the draft, just go get your guys. Enjoy the team that you have, especially in a redraft format. There are no consequences. There is only upside in this, because if I'm right, gosh, that's going to feel good, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you all the way. Yeah. So I guess, Billy, what do you think about Mark Andrews? I'm just curious, as someone who's not in Scott Fishbowl, but like you obviously have opinions on all these players, and this is a redraft league, but Mark Andrews kind of coming off a weird season last year, and the Ravens are looking similar, which is a very run heavy. I mean, what do you think? Is that a good pick there, Mark Andrews?
Yeah, I think he is a bit undervalued because we have so many exciting receivers in that team, and everyone's talking about the passing, that I think you kind of move away from the tight end in that offense. But when you watch them, they so want to get away from Mark Andrews, but halfway through the game, they're like, we gotta throw the ball to Mark Andrews. Yeah. He's the best option we have. And not quite Mahomes, Kelsey level of just like mind meld, but they do tend to think in the same way and know what they want to do with the key points of the game. So I love Mark Andrews. I think you might see him slow, make sure that he's healthy earlier in the year. But I have been seeing quite a bit of just pairing him with Isaiah Likely, who they tend to go to when Mark Andrews is out, because I think at this point you got to assume maybe 2 to 3 games a year he might just be out. But whenever he is, Isaiah Likely just immediately ascends to like a top 12 tight end as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Great
Completely
point.
Agree.
Yeah. And maybe I'll grab Likely later. It's a pretty deep league for a redraft league. So there's so much optionality. And I think waivers lock for a bit as well. Not a bad pick. Yep. But really the main news that we've got is that we're about 2 weeks out from training camp. I mean, that's really it. We're just hoping that nobody does anything stupid at a nightclub or rams their boat into a dock or anything like that. That's where my head is at. Billy, do you have anything that you're keying in on from a news perspective this time of year?
Well, I'll say I'm a Giants fan, so doing something stupid at a nightclub like ruined the Giants' chances with Plaxico Burress way back in the day. So that like brings back bad memories. No, I think the trading camp is always exciting. I'm really paying attention to beat writers to see, like, I'm not making immediate moves, but kind of building out okay, who are the players that I'm hearing pop up? Last year, I remember Puka Nakua just kind of like kept having like just like, hey, he seems really good in camp, and I wasn't making a ton of moves because of that. But actually, right before the season started, I picked up a bunch of him because I had a couple of guys get hurt, and I was like, I keep hearing about this rookie who everyone keeps talking about at camp. Might as well take a shot. So I'm not really paying attention to the national guys, but more of like, what are the beat writers saying? Who are they noticing in training camp?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Andrew?
Well, on the same page, yeah. I want to see how the rookies are showing up to camp. I want to see that they're, jiving with the quarterbacks if they're a receiver. I want to see that they're getting to know the plays and kind of, not looking stupid. I guess they're coming in shape and they're not doing anything dumb. I mean, training camp is kind of an odd spot because you're in the middle of July. It's really hot almost everywhere in America, and everybody's practicing. I mean, even if you're indoors, you still have to deal with the weather a little bit. So part of me is just kind of like, let's see it. Let's see if we get what we think we're going to get, and start to confirm some biases or, take in new data points and start making adjustments. But honestly, I was saying this on another show actually earlier today that, I tend to listen a lot more to the negative news than the positive news, right? The positive news can be kind of bluster and not really mean anything. And I don't know. I feel like the negative news, there's no reason to be negative other than the honesty. So that's what I'll be listening for is, seeing if my rookie evaluations are on point and then trying to read through the tea leaves and find the actual nuggets of truth.
Yeah. What I'm doing right now is trying to find pairings in my league saying like, all right, I've got 15 backup running backs. Which running backs can I sell to people who want to get a little bit of additional security, especially when the inevitable hamstring pulls start to happen?
Yeah.
That's really what I'm waiting for is let's get these minor tweaks, not the torn Achilles or ACL, but these minor injuries that could be nagging into the season. That's when trade partners are made this time of year. So if you're looking at your rosters, y'all, like it's not a bad idea to check out waivers and see if there's a few extra backup running backs that you can grab. Because if a wide receiver does that, there isn't a natural trade fit typically. We're not entirely I'm personally not looking to shop for Jalen Tolbert if he has increased opportunity in July, right? But if there's a backup running back, let's say Najee Harris has an injury. Well, Jalen Warren shoots straight up, right? So he's somebody where I have a bump in value, a bump in trade equity. So just try to seek out those opportunities right before this camp breaks in the next couple of weeks because it's going to happen fast and furious before you know it.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think the other thing to think through is also who in your league is like really prone to rookie hype and training camp hype. I find every year when I'm trying to think of who it was last year, but they broke out a huge, preseason game run, and I just, reached out to the guy I know who loves that stuff, and I sent him for a third. Like, I didn't think the running back was much of anything, and I knew that he was into preseason stuff. So, who in your league is like really prone to buy into that hype, and then just selling that hype as fast as you can?
I think that's a good point too. I think sometimes we misunderstand or maybe misremember that this is a game of humans by humans for humans. And humans by nature are very emotional and reactionary as much as we don't want to be. And I think Dynasty, sometimes people get wrapped around the axle and thinking like, well, it's Dynasty. I got to think long term. No, you don't. Let's go win. Let's go get a player who can add to your roster and make your team better this year. And you might be able to get a discount on someone like a James Conner or like someone else like a Najee Harris even. Like you might be able to get those guys for cheap because everybody's looking at the rookies. And it's like, oh, look over here. No, I'm looking over there. You want to make sure you're zagging while everyone's zigging.
Absolutely. And this time of year is a great opportunity to look at your process, to say like, hey, how am I approaching the way that I'm building teams? Is there anything that I could be doing differently or better? And that leads into our main segment of the night. Billy, this is something that I think you shine at from the DMs that we've sent back and forth, is parsing through how to blend what my co-host on the Superflex Super Show calls the numbers butts, the analytics nerds who pour through all the spreadsheets, who have all the different metrics that they're citing left and right, and the film people, the people who watch the tape and they form individual player takes for, whatever reasons that they've got, their own processes, which are both good and bad. There is no right or wrong way to do this. I think what you do, though, Billy, is you blend this really well, at least in the conversations that we've had. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today, because I want to learn. I want to grow a little bit. It's July. I want to improve my approach towards Dynasty. And I think you've got a lot to offer in that space.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, the blending of narratives and numbers, as you put it, I love the idea. I work not strictly, but primarily out of a working model in my job called the Working Genius. So I do a lot of marketing, and I'm not like graphically skilled or anything like that. I don't have a lot of you know content knowledge, but the reason they really like me there is because I have something called discernment. And so what it means is I can pick up an idea of like, I don't come up with a lot of great ideas. So when I hear people rattling off stats and things like that, my job in my company is to be like, oh, that's the one. That's the thing that is going to work here. And so I ask a lot of questions. My other one's wonder. So I ask a lot of questions, and there's wonder, invention, and then discernment is kind of how the initiation process goes. And I've kind of leaned into that. And so there's so many inventors in the space. There's so many, and everyone's shooting out ideas. And what I try to do is just not try to reinvent the wheel, do something that everyone else is doing, because I'm not good at it. I'm not an inventor. I'm not going to like look at a spreadsheet and be like, oh, wait, I can create a stat out of this, this, and this. Like that, I'll never be able to do that. But I see people who can, and I go, great. But what inventors do is they just invent, and they don't have discrimination. They just like, I'm just going because that's what they love to do. And so maybe a little nefariously, I don't really give much feedback to inventors if they're not asking for it. I'm just like, okay, well, that actually seems like it works because I can see it working here. And when you start combining people who are talking about very different things, and you have common names pop up, and you're like, oh, I've heard this name from 3 different people who have no connection to one another and have very different processes. I'm picking up that guy left and right. So Tommy, I think one I mentioned to you earlier was Kamani Vidal. I was like, I never heard of this dude. I have never seen tape on him. I didn't even know what college he played for, but someone mentioned him. Like, well, I'm gonna write his name down. And I was listening to another, just a rookie now analyst kind of mentioned his name. Like, oh, that's 2 strikes, right? I'm gonna start. This name's popping up quite a bit, and then he gets dropped to the Chargers, and I'm like, this is where narrative comes in, right? We're talking about a coach that loves to run the ball. We're talking about players who are on the decline of their career. I'm like, this is a guy I'm picking up left and right, and I don't expect him to hit week 1, but I'm saying, I have a coach that I know loves to run the ball and hardball. I have guys that have J.K. Dobbins, who everyone loves, but just can't stay on the field. Gus Edwards, who's just declining. I'm like, I see a path here where whether he's good or not, in 3 weeks, everyone thinks he is. So I don't know if I'll keep him long-term. I don't know what I'm doing with him. I'm just saying, I'm just kind of forecasting a narrative here of, wow, Gus Edwards isn't good. J.K. Dobbins, sprains an ankle. All of a sudden, Kamani Vidal is now everyone's favorite running back.
I love that. And I love the thought of being inventors, like that really spoke to me because I feel like that is partially our role, Andrew, is coming up with ideas, voicing opinions, and putting it out to the space so other people can execute on it. Maybe not exactly how we're proposing, but using their own process. Did that resonate with you as well?
Yeah, no, and that's actually a lot of it is that there is sometimes I feel like I'm just trying to convey a general idea. Like just I have some sort of, like you said, wonder is a good word for that. And obviously that's why it's known as that. But like I just had this inkling of an idea, and sometimes just talking it out with other people can be helpful. But at the same time, that idea can sprout and inspire another idea in someone else. And I think that's actually a perfect idea of what we try to do with Find Me a Trade, right? It's all of us kind of coming together to find what we would do, not necessarily saying that's what someone should or has to do, but just to kind of spark an idea and to say, hey, I would be trading away so-and-so because I think their value is high. And the person who has the team might be like, I hadn't thought of that. Like, that's the point, is to open our minds up to this. And I think that's what makes us all junkies too, is that we're all trying to find an edge. We're all trying to work on those margins and try to see where we can accelerate and do something a little quicker than the rest of our league and be the first across the post, and that's where I think these kind of conversations can be helpful, even on a broad level. We talk a lot about specific player values, but like you said it really well, Billy, like you hear the same name a couple of times, it starts to bubble up in your head. And Kamani Vidal is actually a great point on that. I think that there is a, 30-40% chance kind of a thing that he becomes something that we want to have in fantasy and in Dynasty. I think Gus Bus is going to be the guy. Gus Edwards should be the number 1 running back for, barring anything crazy. J.K. Dobbins is currently the 2nd running back in L.A., but he's already shown that his cliff has already happened. Like, he's past the apex and probably more likely trending down than up. And Vidal, on the other hand, as a rookie, is more likely trending up than down. And I, in Dynasty, generally want ascending assets. So if someone out there hasn't heard of Kamani Vidal, take a look. Maybe he's on your waivers in shallower leagues. If you have heard of him and haven't traded for him, you might want to do it now because nobody's talking about him. You may know about him, but he's not bubbling up yet. You're on that leading edge. That's exactly what we're here to do. So I love that idea, Billy. And again, as someone who is a big fan of ideas, you verbalizing ideas is helping me verbalize my ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And another name, Rasheen Ali. So I take what Zach Reed says very seriously because he does a lot of the work. He fills in the gaps of my knowledge voids, the things that I either can't or don't want to spend time doing. He does really, really well. And he puts out a rookie hootenanny. And I take what he says with these rookies sort of as my own opinions. I just adopt them because at the level of investment that Kamani Vidal was 2 months ago, what, a mid-third round pick? What is the harm in making that type of bet, using someone else's process if you trust them? But Zach also mentioned Rasheen Ali, and my co-host John also got on that bus. And so I'm all about it. I'll take a backup running back with Baltimore. They also love to run the ball.
Mm-hmm.
They've also, the offensive line isn't as good as it was last year. I'll fully admit that. And we've got King Henry there. So like the path isn't as clear. The opportunity maybe isn't quite as good as it might have been last year, but it sure is there. All it takes is one injury and you've got extreme relevance for the cost of the 311.
I'm with you 100% on that. I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
I think another way you can blend narrative and numbers that is just what the film people are saying. Like, here's how this player succeeds, right? So I think a big one of that is Quentin Johnston. Was a lot of the film guys I was listening to were saying he's big and he's fast, but he's really not a deep threat. Like, that's not his game. And they look at his average depth of target. You're like, this is not aligning. They're throwing him deep, but that is not what he does, right? So I think it helps you give, context to numbers, right? Like, is average depth of target a good stat? Like, do you want just higher of that? It's like, well, not all the time, right? It's like you talk about in terms of baseball exit angle, where's the ball going? It's like, well, a bigger one's better. It's like, well, not if you don't have a lot of power, then you're just hitting fly balls, right? And so kind of knowing like where does this player succeed? What do they do? Hear that from the film guys and say, well, what's the team doing with this player? Is that working? And if those numbers start shifting into more alignment, you're like, okay, this player, everyone was out on Quentin Johnston because he was terrible last year, like just pretty bad. But if all of a sudden you see like, oh, he's catching the ball, 3 yards away from the line of scrimmage, they're trying to do something new, I might start buying him, cheaper to see like if this becomes something I'm interested.
Yeah. Actually, that's another name I mentioned on another podcast too, is that everybody's out. That's when I usually want to be in. You know what I mean? Like if the price gets low enough, everybody's worth buying. And Quentin Johnston's one of those guys that had a lot of hype. Yeah, he might be terrible, but he really can only go up. Right. Yeah. Like that's kind of what I'm looking for is like, he's at the bottom of the barrel. I could trade a third for him. Give me the guy that might do it now rather than the third who might do it later. You know what I mean? Like give me the pick now is really what it is.
Yeah. Although you may not invent the metrics, Billy, do you use any metrics to make your dynasty decisions?
I do, but I'm not like, I don't have a spreadsheet of metrics, things like that. I'm listening to people who do, like, you, Tommy, Peter Howard is a guy, I tune into.
Peter,
like, what is he saying? Adam Harnstead is a guy I'm looking at. He's got just a different animal of stats. Like he's looking at things in a totally different perspective. But again, kind of going back to when the number guys are all agreeing on something where, Peter Howard's like, hey, I'm seeing that, rookies should have a bigger impact in the top 12 this year. And someone like Adam is saying like, hey, this rookie seems to be standing out to me. I don't know why. I'm like, okay, these two things are kind of adding up where this is a player I'm in on.
Yeah. Andrew, what do you use to make your determinations on your recommendations? How much of it is film? How much of it is data? And how do you blend that?
I tend to look more at the data just because I feel like film can deceive me easier. I know data can deceive as well, but I am not by any means a film wonk, and I'm not a film grinder. I kind of do what you tend to do, where I trust the people that are smarter than me, like the Matt Baldwins, Zach Reeds, things like that. Like, Christopher Harris is really good at that too. Some of these guys that have just been doing it for a long time and they have a really good track record. But I've seen those guys that are kind of like, I like what I'm seeing and I like the film, but they're just not being used. So it doesn't end up mattering. And I feel like the data can tell that picture a little bit clearer, and kind of what you said about Quentin too, Billy, where it's like, he's not meant to be a deep guy, and you can see they're throwing him deep and it's not working. So of course it's not working. Like the data seems to back that up, but you watch him on film and it just looks like he can't catch. Yeah. Right. So like it feels like there's more, I don't know, more meat to it. And again, it's a vibe, purely based on vibes, because I think honestly, the way that this all goes, and really humanity in general, is all based on vibes, right? Nobody is ever in a vacuum. I think we all see it on Twitter, especially, where somebody puts a poll out and say, hey, I made this trade, which side do you want? And you get people that go, oh, that is clearly a ridiculous trade. I can't believe you got that pulled off. And then I'm the one that's like, but which side? You know what I mean? Like you weren't clear, because I think that's ultimately what this is. Like, we're all just emotional beings. And I think sometimes, again, very reactionary. And I think sometimes we forget that the other people in our leagues are reactionary too. And so I try to lean into that and kind of go towards that more and trust the data more than my eyes. And I know that may seem a little counterintuitive, but I just feel like that's had the better results for me. If I tend to go kind of to what Billy said earlier too, like if you kind of go with the beating of the drum, as Zach Reed always says, like, you start to listen to the same names and the same guys get talked about over and over across multiple platforms, whether it's narrative or numbers, those things tend to bubble up. And I think that's where good players can be found. But you're never going to be perfect. And I just think data for me anyway, has a higher hit rate. And I'm not saying it's perfect either. I'm saying data is like 60% and film is like 53. You know what I mean? Like, both of them are good, neither are great. And if you combine the two in whatever way it works for you, you benefit.
Here's what I do is I watch literally every single game every single week. I watch the condensed version. Thank God for NFL Plus, right? Because Monday, the games are released. And so I'm watching condensed games. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to see where is the data lying to me? Where is it wrong? Not where am I right, but where is the data wrong? And I'm doing the same thing vice versa. So I look at the games first and I make notes. It's not like I'm scouting players or anything, but I'm making notes throughout the games. And then I go to the data after. And I use the Fantasy Points data suite because it's just so comprehensive. And they offer so many different features and functions and metrics that I could never imagine on my own. And so by combining what my eyes are telling me isn't true with what the data is saying is true, you can start to blend and figure out what's working for you, what metrics you can trust in your own process, because data is open to interpretation. And so I think that I've come up with pretty reasonable indicators for wide receivers. I've found that running backs is more of a film test for me. I can tell if running backs are better than the metrics can, based on the waiver transactions. So every single week on Monday, I have to put out a bunch of ads and drops and trades for and tradeaways. And I know I'm doing well when 80% of them match up with JJ Zacharyson. But I don't know until a couple of days later, right? So everyone has those podcasts that come out where it's like, you should be buying this guy. And if I'm aligned with JJ Zacharyson, I'm probably mostly on the right track. And really what I'm interested in is where we differ, right? What did we interpret differently? That's the room where maybe I've found something he hasn't, or maybe my process was wrong and I need to look at it again. And so while every listener may not be a content creator, you can do something similar in a much more pared down version. Whatever games you're watching, just take a couple of notes, jot them down, and see if they're mentioned by a JJ Zacharyson or somebody else. And say like, okay, so my eyes weren't lying to me. I can start to trust this through my process and possibly gain an edge.
Yeah, no, and I like JJ for both, to be honest. I think he's good at both numbers and narrative. Like he's really good at watching film and grinding the numbers and coming up with the math to support it. So that's a good pick too, for sure.
Yeah. Hey, Billy, how do you use Twitter to make your dynasty decisions? I know that there's a lot of good, a lot of bad, a lot of information, and a lot of bravado. How do you use this as a tool?
That's a great question. We were talking about this a little off air. I am not an avid poster. I'm not, putting out polls or responding to a ton of things. I actually wasn't on Twitter until, I don't know, a year and a half ago, just because I just found it to be not quite toxic, but just like such an echo chamber of just everyone saying the same thing. I mostly use Twitter for research, and I don't mean research in terms of data, but like who's out there and what are they saying? It helps keep me informed of like what players are on my own roster am I going to start getting trade requests for? Because sure enough, a player is starting to get hot on Twitter, and I'm getting trade requests for him left and right. Like, oh, okay, that's why this is happening. But also to find other people who I call thought leaders, who are just like, wow, I like the way they think, and I'm going to find their content and just use Twitter to do that. That's how I use Twitter. it's hard. It's actually a lot of work to like find who's like actually putting out unique thoughts and who's actually like engaging with real news and real data to be like, hey, I don't know if this is right or not, but this is what I'm seeing. And that's the type of people I gravitate towards, where I'm like, okay, where's your content? Because I want to read more about that. I want to see what you're doing. Obviously, we only have so much time in a day. So eventually you get selective about like, who am I listening to on a regular basis? What am I reading whenever I get the chance? But I remember I go back to Adam Harstead. The first time I was like, oh, this is someone I'm just like, he puts out a tweet and I'm like, I'm clicking whatever article he's writing or anything like that. Just it's such a different way to think. So that's how I'm using Twitter. I'll be honest, polls to me drive me nuts because I'm just like, you have no context, right? It's like, hey, here's a bunch of names. I'm like, I don't know your league rules. Like, and I think league rules, I was thinking about this today, are like vegetables. Like, we all know we should be eating our vegetables. We know it's probably one of the most important things in our diet, but we all act like they're not important in the Twitterverse, right? It's just like it's like, hey, here's the roster size. I'm like, well, is it tight end premium? Like, like
go on.
Like, right. Like, I have a nice start, but this is just the French fries. Like, where's the broccoli? And so that stuff I try to avoid because, I mean, like, I'm voting on a poll. I'm like, I know 1% of the information I need. Like, what are your league mates doing? Should you be rebuilding? Like, that's a real question. Like, I like Tyreek in this trade, but maybe not for you. I don't know.
Yeah, and on that note too, I'm a big fan of asking for more context. When people DM me like, which one should I do? I'm like, man, I need a lot more info. Like, you got 20 minutes, But at the same time, I love putting out polls just in a kind of like, I'm just trying to catch the pulse, because I feel like a lot of times values can change. And so sometimes I'll put something out that'll be like, of these two players, which would you rather roster? Vacuum intended. Do you know what I mean? Like, I no trade poll. That doesn't make sense. But like, just of these two players, it's kind of a way to just sort of put a barometer on things, right? And I tend to use Twitter a lot for I try to find people that I disagree with, and then have them explain why. And the best conversations I've gotten into have been with people that I didn't agree with at all, but learned a lot from, and kind of learned how to make my process better, or learn maybe where I had a blind spot, what have you. But my least favorite are when somebody just gives a hot take and can't back it up. And I said earlier, like, it's vibes. That is like, that's kind of a cop out, but that's sort of what I get into. Is sometimes we're like, I don't know, I just got a feeling. And I tend to do that too. I'm just like, I don't have an answer. I have a feeling. And part of it is I don't hate that, but those are obviously the least beneficial conversations. And so I try to avoid that if I can. I don't put out hot takes like, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be the wide receiver 1 overall. Why? I have no idea. You know what I mean? Like, I'm predicting the future. All of us are wrong. Like, hot takes are terrible. So I don't like the hot take-ness of Twitter and Reddit and all these other places. But I do like where somebody can post, hey, I found this. This is what I'm doing with that information. Ask me questions. Those kinds of things. Where I can be like, so did you find that it was better in the beginning of the season or the end of the season? They go, oh, I didn't think of that. Like, so those kind of conversations help me. And I like to think it helps them, but I don't know. But generally speaking, I like to use Twitter to kind of bounce ideas off of, or like catch me on something like, hey, am I way off on this? Like, this is what I was thinking. Am I crazy? That's kind of where I tend to use Twitter for.
Yeah. I love the concept of seeking out analysts and people, just listeners who are posting thoughts that run counter to you. That's exactly what I want to do, because I want to understand better what my league mates are doing. I know they don't act the way that I do. And I want to understand that. I want to deeply understand it. That way I can work in the gray areas of negotiating better deals for them, of cultivating better relationships, of knowing how much I need to spend on waivers to get in front of them. Of course, there's a devious component to that as well. Like, I want to understand what you do so I can pull the rug out from under you and trip you up as frequently as I can. And luckily, as we play with, folks on podcasts, they tell us all their ideas, and that's great. Yeah. And a lot of people, they follow suit. I think one of the biggest industry leaders, there's a few of them, of course, but like Leo Pasiga in playing your opponents, just an absolute goat. Whenever I think I've come up with something on a psychological basis, he's already said it like 10 years ago.
Yep.
He's a big one. Charles Chill, FFB, like Scott Connor.
Yeah.
He is
crazy brain on that guy, man.
Changed the way that we play Dynasty as an entire community. And so I need to listen to what he says, whether or not I agree with him, which I most often do. He's got a great process. But even when I don't agree with him, I need to understand it intimately because someone else is probably going to try it out in at least one of my leagues, right?
Yep.
And then, I mean, On the Couch with Sigmund Bloom is
Oh.
maybe my favorite and most long-standing show. Like, we're given a lot of flowers, but these are all really well-deserved in my opinion, because again, it's process, it's theory, it's strategy, and there's some form of almost jazz to that show that I really enjoy. Yeah.
I think of Twitter when I think of when Twitter's working well. I think of in terms of conversation. I like to think of conversation. This is not my idea. I think it's from a book from Theodore Zeldin. But the idea of like you have so much cards, and if you talk to people you agree with all the time, all you have are those ideas. But when you talk to someone you disagree with, it's like, and you're not trying to convince them that your cards are right, but like, hey, what cards do you have that I can add to my deck? Because that's an interesting thought, and not necessarily like, I'm a photocopy, but like, how can I meld these with where I'm currently at? My background is education, and the idea of learning being when you push someone outside their comfort zone, when they're no longer in equilibrium in their mind. Like, I have this new piece of information, and I don't know what to do with it, and I need to like either pull it in or expand my learning. It's just so much fun, and that's why I like Twitter, and that's why I got back into it. Of just like, where are those people who push me outside of my mental comfort zone of terms of what I think I know, and push me into places that, man, I didn't really think about it in that way. And that's going to change how I do things.
Yeah. And actually to piggyback on that too, I love when I run into somebody who disagrees with me. I know a lot of times people take that as an aggression and like an attack and all this. I look at it and I just go, oh my God, we would make amazing trade partners. Like, God, I wish we were in a league together. Like, honestly, if you can find the positive in anything, it's disagreement. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, what do you have that I don't have? Like, what do you not like that I do like? That's pretty much bartering 101, isn't it? Like, just what can we do where we both walk away happy or a little bit angry, depending on how you look at trading, right? But part of it is too, like, it's a negotiation. And I think a negotiation in its essence is a conversation. It's going to go back and forth, not always, and trades don't always have to be countered, and we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. But I think the conversation itself is where you see Twitter be helpful, because it can help with some of those conversations, whether it's with the person you're trading with or not. It can help you decide what you want out of something just to have the conversation. And you can even look at Twitter, for some people anyway, it's like a free therapist. It's not a good therapist, but it's a free one, right? It's where they can just like voice their opinions and voice their concerns into the void, and then people start commenting on it. And I do like when people post something and then people respond and they're like, why are you replying? I'm like, because you posted it publicly, dude. Like, what do you expect? So again, it's just there are pros and cons to this, but yeah, I think we're all on the same page. Like, finding people you disagree with and can learn from is ideal. And that's the only way you grow, is by changing and not staying who you are and not staying with what you know, but finding those cards you're missing. I like that, Billy.
Yeah, totally. There's so many ways that we can take this. Billy, do you have any additional or closing thoughts before we move on to the next topic?
No, I think we covered it pretty well. I think just be mindful of the amount of time you spend on social media, because you can get real lost in there, man.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to give you an opportunity at the end to throw out your Twitter handle if people want to DM you, if you're willing. I think that you've got a lot of thoughts on this that maybe we don't have time for today. But moving on, I didn't see any Dynasty Junkies Listener League trades. Did you,
Nope.
Andrew?
Nope, we didn't. This is again, this is very common in this kind of the off season. I know a lot of the Dynasty Junkies that are in these leagues are in a bunch of leagues that are doing Scott Fishbowl drafting or doing live startup drafting or what have you. Like, this is kind of that calm before the storm. I know myself too. I'm doing a bunch of like best ball drafting right now, and I'm trying to get back into redraft mode a little bit. But usually by the end of July is when I start pivoting back into my Dynasty leagues and taking a look as we get to the preseason. I do plan on sending some trades out this weekend for sure. Just to start moving that needle again. And again, we've got 3 leagues and all of them are a little bit quiet. That's the perfect time to send a trade. So if you're listening and are curious, hey, yeah, send me a trade. We would love to talk about it on the show if we can get one pulled off.
One thing I thought was interesting, Dynasty Daddy they have like a bot that does updates for the most traded assets, in the Dynasty space. None of them were quarterbacks this go around.
Interesting.
And that tells me that like folks have made their moves in Superflex leagues. A lot of the quarterback market is sort of in a settled place right now. And so if you're a little weak at quarterback, if you had your rookie draft and you're like, oh, I only have 1 or 2 quarterbacks, I may need to bolster this position. It might be a good idea to wait just a few more weeks because that market seems to be mostly dead.
Yeah, or go and get one of those guys that you think is super cheap, right? Like their value is going to go up, and before it goes up, that's when you want to go get them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm seeing a couple quarterbacks right now. I think two I have right now, Geno Smith and Deshaun Watson, of just like no one wants to trade for their like quarterback two right now. Like
Yeah,
trading for Geno Smith is very not sexy in, what are we, July, where it's just like,
Yeah.
why do I don't need Geno Smith. But, week two, you're like, wow, I am getting crushed in the super flex spot. I need a quarterback too. So I think in the terms of, I would be buying quarterbacks right now. And the trade requests I'm getting, I'm just like, man, I'm not selling him for a second. Like, I'm just not doing that. That's what I've been seeing in the quarterback market.
Well, and speaking of quarterbacks too, I wrote an article for Fantasy Pros a couple of weeks ago, I think, or even a month ago now, and I mentioned Jacoby Brissett, right? Like there's a lot of those kind of quarterbacks. Aiden O'Connell is another one I love acquiring right now because a lot of people are looking at Gardner Minshew as the starter. Gardner hasn't been a starter very often and very well. So it's very possible that week 3, we see Aiden O'Connell take that over. So, and the opposite for Brissett, right? They've got Drake May, but Brissett might start the whole season or might start 2 weeks. And I think some of those really cheap quarterbacks is kind of where I tend to go, discount bin shopping. And I think that's where you're not seeing a lot of that QB2 movement. You're not seeing a valuable QB being moved right now. But I'm totally fine going, discount hunting on the waivers even. Scott Connor, we mentioned him before, like I think he says this a lot on different podcasts, but he'd much rather have quarterbacks and running backs than receivers, right? Threshold receiver is one of his things. And I'm with him. Like I'd much rather have, a Jake Browning than, the 70th receiver. Like you're not going to start the 70th receiver. You might actually start a Jake Browning. Again, we saw it last year, right? So like it's much easier to get immediate value kick on that. And then again, as players get injured in the offseason, which sad to say, we're going to see some of that again. The running back and quarterback positions tend to see a bigger boost, and that delta is what you're trying to capture. So if you can get that cheaper delta, that's going to come in much more handy for your team than wide receiver 4 becomes wide receiver 3. Like who cares?
Yeah. I think even like an ugly name, so Sam Darnold is like one guy I'm grabbing because I've seen a couple teams that are like anchoring 2 quarterbacks, Dak Prescott and JJ McCarthy. And you may not see JJ McCarthy for a few weeks. And as much as we, this is the Junkies podcast, we live for this. We're watching every news article, like we know everything. Like, most of us say, JJ's probably not out there week 1. There's probably 4 or 5 people in your league who don't know that, and they're gonna right before week 1 look in and be like, wait, JJ's not starting? Well, what am I doing? And I have no problem sending Sam Darnold for a third. You know what I mean? Just like, great, amen. I picked this guy up waivers, and now I have a third. And you'd be surprised how much stuff people don't know that you assume everybody knows.
Yeah, really great point, Billy. Andrew, do you want to send out the bat signal for a few more Find Me a Trade submissions? Because I think we're starting to run low, aren't we?
We sure are, yeah. And I actually just tweeted that out today, so perfect timing. I was looking at the list and trying to see if we had any new ones, and I went and checked, and we sure do not, which is a little surprising, but also we're in the quiet season, so it makes sense. I also think, though, sorry, a little cough today. This quiet time of year can be a really good time to go find some trades. And I think that's where this is the perfect time if you're not sure what to do, or you're just kind of in general uncertain about what direction to take your team, or just kind of running out of ideas like we talked about before. Submit the team on Find Me a Trade. We have I've submitted or retweeted the roster submission. I'll do that again here in a little bit. But generally speaking, you can submit a sleeper MFL league and we'll get it. ESPN and Yahoo are a little trickier. Flea Flicker, please don't. But generally speaking, if it's a sleeper or MFL, we can get it figured out and put it on the show. And we love doing that. And again, we are running a little bit low, and the leagues that we have are a little bit on the older side and have changed a lot. So if you've submitted and haven't heard yours, submit it again. There's no problem with that. And we'll put it right back on the list and try to help you out and get you a trade.
It's also our favorite segment of the entire show. It's just a lot of fun to look through your leagues and to see what other people are doing, how they're building their teams, and to try to help to get deals done. I really enjoy it. I know you do too, Andrew. So do the other co-hosts when they're on. So it's a really fun thing. Let's just keep it going, y'all. But that does lead us into the Find Me a Trade segment. Do you have that drop, Andrew?
I sure as hell do. Thank you very much for the reminder. I was just thinking, like, you have it. Oh, wait, no, you're not logged in right now. That's right. That's right. So we got to have the best drop of all time.
Find me a trade.
That's right, Brian Har. We are finding a trade tonight. So go ahead there, Tommy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Har. So we've got kind of a stock league. This is a 12-team super flex league that we had submitted to us. It's a start 9 with 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and a couple of flexes with a super flex. At _ Dewey _ submitted this team to us. The league's name is The League. So got that going for him, which is nice. Yeah. Manager gave us some comments, which was great. I really like the context. So this was submitted a little while ago. They were coming off a intended tank season. They grabbed the 101, the 102, 104, 112. So like a lot of really good draft capital. They've also got some good young players, which we'll get into in just a minute. And their thought was like, I'm going to load up on some of these rookies. Now, what do? I'm sort of exiting the rebuild. I want to hear your thoughts. Andrew, do you want me to read off this roster, or at least the relevant
I just
pieces?
pulled it up here. So yeah, if you want to read it off, that'd be great. But we don't need to get into the every inch of it. But yeah, if you want to read up some of the bigger names, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's headlined at quarterback with Anthony Richardson and Caleb Williams selected at the 101. We've also got Michael Penix and a whole bunch of backup quarterbacks like Sam Darnold, Jake Browning, Trey Lance, like all of those types of guys. At running back, it's a little bit thinner. So we've got Joe Mixon and then a bunch of backups again, but some decent ones like Marshawn Lloyd, Miles Sanders, Rico Dowdle, Jalen Warren. So some of those RB3, RB4, RB5 types. At wide receiver, much more fertile ground. Marvin Harrison Jr., Brian Thomas, Devontae Adams, A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin, and JSN. And at tight end, they've got Kyle Pitts, Noah Fant, and Mike Gesicki. No first-round pick going into 2025, but most of the future capital beyond that. Did I capture it all there, Andrew?
You did great. That was perfect. Yeah, because I think the way this team is looking, and I actually did send him a message just to check in and let him know that we were going to be using his team tonight. And Justin said that, he thinks he's lightest at running back. And I was, yeah, I agree. And I think that's probably the place I would try to tackle. So I can go into my trade first if you want. I don't mind at all. I think we're kind of all in the same boat here trying to figure this one out. At first, when we had the league up, the rookie picks weren't coming through. And we had that issue last time too. But we were able to get the FS rookie to help us out with that, who helped us with the sheet. So he was able to square that up. Thank you so much for that. It helps a ton in building a trade to be able to see all the players on the roster. So my trade is a little bit, I would say a little bit on the weaker side, or, maybe not as flashy, because honestly, I don't think you need to do a whole lot. I think this team is ready to contend. I think those rookies that you took were great picks and definitely helped bolster your team. And again, my trade is a little bit more of what can I send that I don't hate, and what can I get back that can help me push me over the edge of this year? So my logic here was to send Devontae Adams, who's getting on the older side, and I think you might be able to get some value for him now, but maybe not much after. And then one of those backup quarterbacks, I just picked Jameis Winston just to throw one in there. Deshaun McLeod for Christian Kirk and Austin Eckler. And the logic is here, I'm tearing down from Adams to Kirk. In my opinion, they are a different tier. I think there are some people that have them in the same tier and might even have Kirk ahead, but I personally do not. I think Kirk could be, and he has that potential to be, but Devontae Adams is still Devontae Adams, and I think he's still going to warrant a pretty fair amount of attention. But I really just was doing this to get Austin Eckler. Like, I just wanted a trade where I can tear down at receiver and add a running back to my team to go with Joe Mixon as someone I can kind of set it and forget. This is a PPR with 2 running backs starting guaranteed. And again, with Scott Fishbowl, we were just talking about like there's one of each, and that makes a difference. You don't have to start that many running backs. And this one, you're going to have to start 2. And you kind of hit the nail on the head with your analysis quickly. There was Joe Mixon, and then Jalen Warren, I guess, would be the second one every week. That kind of, I don't know, feels gross. You know what I mean? Like, just give me one running back to get through this season and to kind of put a Band-Aid on it and figure it out and go from there. I also think with the way this team is built, you might need to win this year. You've got some young quarterbacks and young receivers, but you're really looking kind of older at the RB position. And if I'm contending, that's where I want the most value. So my logic is then let's go get some running back value. And I think Austin Eckler is in for a big year, especially in PPR. So Billy, I'll kick it to you, I guess. What do you think about that trade? And is that something in general, I guess, that you would consider?
Yeah, I liked it. I think that's the right direction to go. Devontae Adams and Christian Kirk kind of get younger a little bit at the wide receiver position. I think targeting a running back is definitely the way to go for this roster because it is, you had a year rebuilding, it's ready to go. Like I'm looking at this like, yeah, this has got a shot. You need to shore up that RB2 spot. As we kind of get into training camp, it's not so much like, don't worry about your setting your lineups. You start thinking about, okay, week one's not too far away. What am I punching in there? I think last year I got caught flat-footed. I'm like, I don't have to worry about my lineup. And then, it's week one. You're like, oh, my lineup's not good. So you gotta get in that point of like, okay, who is in that RB2 spot? It is July. We're getting close to football. I am nervous about Austin Eckler. I think that, sometimes that running back wall just hits. And there's been a lot of data showing that, older running back switching teams, it may not always be the best. I mean, I could choose to ignore that when I will look at Derrick Henry and be like, this is his year. And then choose to believe that when it's Austin Eckler. And I'm like, I don't know. I do think that part of that is that I think Brian Thomas is a pretty good running back. But I do think they're very different people. And I've been listening to some people say, like, you might see them both on the field at the same time, doing just like kind of keeping the defense on their heels. And you might see a very fast offense coming out of Washington, just like, rattling off plays where someone like Austin Eckler, you get a little bit of a renaissance before they fall off that wall.
No, great analysis. I mean, all fair points. Yeah.
I wanted to ask both of you, are you guys aware of the show Receiver on Netflix?
Mm-hmm. I heard about it, but I haven't seen it yet. No.
So Devontae Adams is one of the key muses of this show. I wonder if that's going to boost his value at all. Do you think it's going to have any effect on the trade market?
It might. I mean, honestly, it just came out yesterday, I think, right? So maybe a little bit early to see any results from that. But I guess it depends, too, on how he looks and what the show is. If he comes off as a jerk or something, then maybe not. But I guess I'd want to see it before I answer that question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just think of like the island game effect. So whenever there's a primetime game, it's like, oh, he's actually pretty good. He's getting 15 targets. I kind of like Devontae Adams, and he gets a little bit more buzz for a week or two. I wonder if we're so bored that all of the different characters on that show, George Kittle being one of them, I just wonder if there's going to be a slight boost in either trade activity or trade value.
I love it. I think about the quarterback show, and I think it really does depend because you think about Kirk Cousins. Also, everyone loves Kirk Cousins because he's a lot of fun on that show. He's the same quarterback he's always been. Like he's always been this like undervalued, low end QB1, high end QB2 that everyone's like, he's kind of boring. And they're like, oh, he's not boring. I kind of want Kirk Cousins on my fantasy roster, but nothing changed. And then you get someone at Marcus Mariota, and his value just tanked because he just came off really lame. I mean, just like man, I really don't want that guy on my roster. When you could be looking at him as a high end backup quarterback right now, but I think back, like, do I really want Marcus Mariota on my roster after watching him in that show? I don't think so.
Yeah. It was weird when he nailed on the team too. Just like
really weird
midweek or something.
Really weird.
Yeah. All right. Why don't you get into your trade, Billy?
Yeah. I was thinking, I didn't look at the trades ahead of time.
Best way to do it, by the way.
Yeah. And so it's a little bit similar to your guys. For me, I like to think of the quarterback position with an anchor and then a lot of upside. And so when I was looking at this quarterback room, Anthony Richardson, Caleb Williams, Michael Penix, I'm seeing like a ton of upside, but a ton of high risk bets, right? And so my thought was to ship off one of those high upside guys, get someone I feel a little bit more confident in, and then maybe pick up a running back on the way. So I was trading Anthony Richardson, Terry McLaurin, and JSN, and that was going to Phoenix. And I was looking for Lamar and Josh Jacobs. And I was hoping for a dual effect here of when I was looking at Phoenix roster, they have Lamar and Baker Mayfield. I would not feel confident going into a year knowing, well, Baker is going to make or break my year. That make me very uncomfortable. And they have
just saying it hurts.
And then you have an aging running back room and no wide receivers that really excite you at all in that room. And so by saying, hey, I dangle some wide receivers out there, Terry McLaurin, new quarterback, JSN, post-hype sleeper in some people's minds, and then Anthony Richardson being the big fish to kind of be like, hey, just hit the reset button on this year. Why don't you take a year, trade for some picks, and I'm going to take, one of the best quarterbacks in the league and running back I really do believe in for this year with Josh Jacobs, and see what you can do with that.
I don't mind that. I think there is some risk with Josh Jacobs, but there's definitely risk with JSN and Terry McLaurin. So you're tiering up, you're packaging up, and I think this is the time of year to do that. I also think that the way Justin's team is set up right now is kind of quarterback heavy. You have maybe some fat you could trim there, and same with the running back position. So doing a 3 for 2 might make some sense to kind of free up that roster spot if you need it. So yeah, I like the general idea of this trade for sure.
Billy, I love this trade. I think it's a great trade. I think that you've consolidated in all the ways that you need to. You've found upside. You found probably more repeatability, more consistency, more everything that you're looking for as you're building a contender. JSN is a polarizing figure. Terry McLaurin, I think he's better as a football player than we give him credit for. He's so good at his body control. He's so fast. He's so precise in his route running. It just has not manifested into very much elite fantasy production. And so we have to sit with that and say that what he has been is most likely what he is going to be as a fantasy asset. And we can appreciate him as a football player instead. And so I like moving off of those 2 wide receivers, getting into the upside of Josh Jacobs, because his situation, the environment that he's in is probably better. Whether or not he can capitalize on it, that's different. But he's got an opportunity to finish pretty clearly within the top 12, if not have another outlier finish where he's got 14 touchdowns and 1,200 yards. Like, that is possible. Is it probable? I mean, that's up to you to decide, but it's there. I don't know if that's possible or probable with a JSN type profile, at least this year. And I love moving from Richardson into Lamar. You're giving up years, but you're gaining a whole lot of stability at that position. John Hogue be damned on that one.
Yeah, this is anti-QBX, right? I was even thinking, though, to kind of piggyback on that. I mean, you might be able to get away with trading away, like you could do something like even just straight up like Richardson and Penix for Lamar. Something like that, where like this team, Phoenix, only has, like you said, Lamar and Baker, and that's it. There's no backups or nothing. And I would be looking to kind of capitalize on what you're heaviest at, which is QB, and what they're lightest at, which is QB. So maybe you could even pull this off without giving away those other, receiver assets if that's something you're looking at. But yeah, I think this is the same kind of trade we're all talking about. Is like tiering up here is not a bad idea to kind of help your roster and make you feel more confident to win. Let's put it that way. You're not going to win, but you're more confident that you have a better chance.
Yeah. Dewey, I have so many thoughts for you, and I can't wait to get them out. So I'm not going to wait to get them out.
Go for it, Tommy. It's all yours.
All right. This team it's suffering from misalignment, disharmony, in my opinion. The assets aren't aligned quite right. You have developmental quarterbacks, and you have some contending pieces behind them. You have a tight end that is high upside that hasn't produced to the level that we've expected. And so there's a lot of disjointedness. And I want to help you fix that a little bit, or at least cover up some of the soft spots of that misalignment. So you're going to have to tighten up the efficiency of your roster here. You've got a lot of fat that I think that we can trim, because if you're going to be relying on Caleb Williams, rookie quarterbacks typically produce somewhere in the QB 20 to 32 range in their first year, even the really, really good ones. Joe Burrow, he was like QB 25 his first year. There's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. It takes them a while to learn the pace of the NFL, how to read defenses, how to do things against bigger, better, stronger athletes. And so you have to be able to scaffold against that. And so what I'm seeing is about a 4 points per game, or about half a win, that you need to overcome by rostering Caleb Williams at the value that he currently holds, right? So you can move laterally out of him into a higher producer, or you can cover up some of those warts. And what I want to do is help you cover that up. So what I want to do is I want to trade or get out of most of these backup quarterbacks. I understand the process. I understand the why you would want to roster Jimmy Garoppolo, Jameis Winston, Sam Darnold, Jake Browning, Trey Lance. I get it. But this is a pretty stock PPR Superflex league. You have pretty limited starting options in your lineup. It's just a start 9, right?
Yep.
You need to optimize that.
We'll start 11.
It's
because of kicker and defense. You're right. Kicker and defense. You're right. My bad.
Yeah. So it's essentially a start 9. That's what we'll call it, at least. So try to trade those quarterbacks away. If you can't, cut them and let other people pick them up spend some fab, and clutter up their rosters a little bit. It'll open up more opportunities for you, I promise. I would also, I know you just drafted Luke McCaffrey. I'd get rid of him. Jalen Tolbert, you're gone. Khalil Shakir, you're gone. Mike Gesicki, Noah Fant, I'm sorry. There's no room without tight end premium for Gesicki and Fant on my team. You can probably pick up a very similar type profile if you want to in 2 months, right? Right now is the time to trim those players off of your roster. So my hope is that my opponents will take these players. I love that you're not carrying a kicker. I don't think you're carrying a defense, but we can't quite see that. So if you are, go ahead and cut your defense. Don't pick up a kicker until you absolutely need to, even though it's a requirement. All of this is to increase your numbers at running back. Looking at the currently rostered running backs, I would guess there's 15, maybe even 20 running backs that could fit on a roster of this size. So go ahead and get them. Get rid of all these other players, grab some extra running backs. What you're attempting to do is stream them and create or recreate in the aggregate something like the RB25. It's not as ambitious as it sounds. You're talking like 15 points per game. And you can do that through streaming these different running back options, some of which you already have, right? But that's what you want to do. It's going to help to overcome some of the deficiencies in your roster just through a volume approach. The other thing you need to do is make up 2 points per game there, because if you're going to be a contender, you can't necessarily be relying on the RB25. Most contenders have 2 or 3, sometimes 4 really strong running backs. And so you're going to need to make up another 2 points per game. So you're about 6 points per game in the hole with the way that your team is currently constructed. Good news is we can fix that. I think the problem is wide receiver for the most part. If you've got a start 2 wide receiver with 2 flexes beyond and a super flex, really all I want to do is roster 5 wide receivers at most. I could even go further down, but that feels like the pain point for most people is 1 beyond the starting limit, right? So 2 plus 2 is 4. 5, you've got 1 as a backup, and you can stream them throughout the season. So let's liquidate some. So I would liquidate some combination of Brian Thomas, Terry McLaurin, and or JSN into either running backs or quarterbacks to push me into a favorite contender status. I did look into buying Kirk Cousins because you have Pitts and Penix. Did not see a good fit in this situation, but it's something to keep an eye on. So I've got 2 trades. The first one, let's trade Brian Thomas and JSN to Joey Smith for Jonathan Taylor. I'm going to press pause there and ask you, Billy, what do you think about this trade? I looked it up in the trade calculators. It does fit. I looked in completed trades. It does fit. It's on the lower end, though. Do you think this can get done, and do you think it's a good fit?
I think it definitely can get done. I think Jonathan Taylor is one of those guys that just people really love and they want to hold on to, or you're going to have to pry them away. So I think it might take a little bit more. But this is where I think we kind of go back to that earlier conversation of, I don't know if that's a trade you just kind of throw into your platform and just hope for the best. But when you reach out to and you're like, hey, what wide receivers do you like? Who, like, for me,
I like that.
AJ Brown is the only, like, I'm not trading AJ Brown. Like, and that includes Marvin Harrison. Like, if he's like, hey, I want Marvin Harrison for Jonathan Taylor, like, sure, maybe you're like, okay, it's going to take a lot more, or I'm going to have to be convinced to do this. But I would start that trade off with a conversation to be like, hey, my wide receiver wallet is open. What's it going to take to buy Jonathan Taylor within reason? You know what I mean? Don't crazy overpay, but I don't know if you got to find out what's their combination of wide receivers that's going to make that work. But I love the idea.
Yeah, the seasoning is right. There's all sorts of different profiles to shop at the wide receiver store. Andrew, what do you think about that? Because I think Billy's onto something there.
I think he is onto something. I think that there's something to be said for kind of sweetening the pot a little bit. I know this is kind of one of those trades too where I might consider sending an extra piece on my side even just to kind of make it easier and kind of easier to swallow, I guess. And I guess too, if you're looking at all of those receivers, I mean, why not do Brian Thomas, Jalen Tolbert, and Jackson Smith and Jigba, and then have him counter with somebody else other than Jalen Tolbert? Let's say he wants Khalil Shakir. Great. All right. Then I want to add Chuba Hubbard from your side. You know what I mean? Like, it gives you the door open to do something else. I also think that and you kind of hit on this a little bit too, Billy, but like I'm looking at it as the other guy, would I make that trade? And the other team there is Joey Smith. He's got Garrett Wilson, Jordan Addison, Cortland Sutton, Stephon Diggs. Like, he's not, I don't know if I'd call him a contender. It looks like it might be more of a rebuild, but his quarterbacks are Jared Goff, Russell Wilson, Zach Wilson. Like, just his team is all over the place, and I think he's way too RB heavy. So I like the idea of this trade, or at least the logic of this trade, of getting rid of some of your receivers and pivoting that value into running back. I think that's the team to target.
Yeah, I do have another trade too.
I know you overachiever, you.
I couldn't help myself because it's such a fascinating team and league. My second option was to trade away Caleb Williams, your 101, and JSN to Corvette and grab Jalen Hurts. It's similar to what you were talking about, Billy, where it's like, let's just get an elite guy. Let's insulate and let's make sure that that position is set for the next 2 or 3 years and you feel really good about it. Contract security is there. The hit rates are there. It's just, we feel pretty confident as an industry that Jalen Hurts is going to be a relevant quarterback for the next 3 years. We think Anthony Richardson probably is, but we're not sure yet. Excuse me. We think Caleb Williams is, but we're not sure yet.
Yeah.
And JSN, a lot of people have doubts. It's not a bad time to get out on him. Andrew, I'm going to kick it back to you. What do you think about my second deal?
This one I'm less of a fan of, only because I'm less of a fan of Jalen Hurts. I don't think that it's a bad trade. That's not who I'd be targeting. I'd be looking more for, if I'm going to be giving away the 101 and another receiver that has a lot of value, I would try to target, and maybe you could switch from JSN to, I don't know, even AJ Brown or Marvin Harris, and one of those guys, like the bigger guys, and go get a Pat Mahomes, right? Yeah. Like let's go broke. Let's go all the way in. And I think that it's good from my experience of not being able to acquire Patrick Mahomes in any league. It's going to take a king's ransom, and that could be a king's ransom. Again, if we're looking at the logic here, you're looking at Corvette's team. If you're looking to go to the Pat Mahomes manager, which is a whole different option here, and I don't know if it would work. But Penny Skennis, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he's got Pat Mahomes, Joe Burrow, and Sam Howell. So he's obviously very lean at quarterback. Maybe you could even do something like Caleb Williams and Michael Penix plus JSN for Pat Mahomes, right? Maybe you could do something like that. But I like the idea of this trade too. If you're going to trade Caleb and you're going to package him with one of those receivers that you consider a surplus, go broke. Let's go all the way in. So I don't personally like Jalen Hurts, but if you do, that's a great trade.
Yeah, I would love to get Mahomes. Do you have a preference between those deals? Do you think either is likely to happen, Billy?
Yeah, I think it goes back to our earlier conversation in terms of like narrative. And so, again, full disclosure, I'm a Giants fan, but the vibes around the Eagles team at the end of last year was just not something I'm ready to buy into. I think we play fantasy football and we look at data and we look at all these skill positions, but they lost their two like core leaders on that team. I think Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelsey retired, and those are like the heart and soul. I lived in Philly, and they like those are Philly guys, right? It's just like that is the Eagles, and everything I've heard about Hurts is like he's not a vocal leader, like great guy, like nothing about that, but just like not like the guy who's going to be up rah in the front of the locker room. And so I'm worried about buying Jalen Hurts at this point, just because I'm really interested to see what the Eagles do this year, and I could be proven very wrong and be like, oh wow. Yeah, the Eagles are just going to crush the league yet again because they always seem to do it. But I do like the idea of like, hey, let's say you have Anthony Richardson, Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr. You have a couple of these guys that are like the odds that all three of them hit are actually pretty low, right? Any one of them we're saying, yeah, it's pretty high, but all three of them is probably not so high. So let's flip one of these guys for something I'm sure about. And for this manager, it's got to be the player that you really like. Who are you sure about? And pick that quarterback and go after them.
Totally. Hey, Andrew, when Billy said that the Philadelphia Eagles lost their leader, did you immediately think of Big Dom as the person that they lost?
No, it's kind of an entertaining twist. Yeah. I mean, maybe the heart of the team. I don't know. I didn't think of that, but I do now. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've got some really good options in terms of different types of trades, different formats, different structures, and plenty of different managers. So I hope that helps. I really enjoyed looking through this league. Don't pick up any kickers until late August, though, please. I know everyone, they poop on kickers, but it's still a part of a lot of different fantasy leagues. Same with defenses. It's just a reality that we kind of have to work through. And so, just wait until the last possible moment.
Or talk to your commissioner about getting rid of them like we did in my home league. But that's a different conversation for a different episode. But yes, I'm with you. Like there's no reason to, like some of these teams are having, they have two kickers. I mean, I guess I get it, but nah, not really. I don't get it. Like I'd much rather roster a running back or quarterback even Like let me put somebody on my team that can grow in value crazy as opposed to a kicker I'm going to have to drop anyway. But yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, Chad Ryland does not belong on
Chad
any.
Ryland does not belong on a roster. No, I'm with you. I didn't even know that was a kicker because I'm not in any leagues with kickers.
He's
Lundelians would be
the
upset.
former white supremacist who's fighting for his kicking job with the Patriots now. So
Oof, even more of a reason. All right, great.
all right. Billy, hey, I want to give you a chance to plug your socials if you would like to. But first, I just want to say thank you for the conversations via DM. You're a really thoughtful guy. And I was grateful that you were willing to come on today and you were willing to share some of the insights that you have. And I hope that you'll join us again in the future, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's been awesome to be here. First time on a podcast and listened to you guys a lot. So it was like, oh, this is really exciting. Appreciate it. For people listening, I'm just a really normal guy. Like in terms of fantasy football, like I am not someone who's like crushing everyone in my leagues, but just really love and talking about and thinking about Dynasty fantasy football.
Well, yeah, again, you're a junkie, so you're in the right place. Let's just put it that way.
There we go.
Hey, Andrew, do you want to plug the socials for the show?
Definitely, yeah. So you can follow us online on Twitter, never the X, as Rocky's always said. You can follow us there at Dynasty Junkies. You can follow us on YouTube at the DAP Network. I think it's DAP_network, but I'm not really sure. Definitely follow us and follow me at Andrew Hall FF. Follow Tommy at FF Tommy B. Don't follow the other two because they're not on today's show. We did get confirmation today that Scott Sidlow will be back in August. Yes. He has had a busy summer, a busy year. He will be gracing us with his presence hopefully sometime in August when things calm down for him. We are off next week, but then July 25th, we go live, and that kicks us into our weekly schedule again. I don't believe it, Tommy. The off season is pretty much over, right? I mean, like we're right back into football season at the end of July here. I'm excited.
It's been so much fun, this non-point scoring season, getting into some theory and jumping on some different shows. I've really enjoyed it, but the reason we do all this work is so that we can win fantasy leagues, and we're so close. It's getting closer every day.
I'm very much excited. Yeah, so definitely follow us and subscribe, rate, and review, do all that kind of stuff. And, thanks so much for coming out in the chat. We only had a couple tonight, which is fine. It's a normal Thursday, but we got Gizmo and Ryan in the chat. Thanks for stopping by. If you're drafting Scott Fishbowl, post them rosters, donate to Fantasy Care. It's a great cause, Toys for Tots. Kids need, toys as much as anybody does at Christmas. It's just such a good time. And again, everybody's here to hang out together and to have fun. That's the reason for the season. But with that, I'll just say it this way. Junkies out.